Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March Madness 2025 Kentucky Wildcats Basketball AMA. I am John Clay, sports columnist with the Lexington Herald Leader and Kentucky.com. I want to bring in my fellow columnist at the Herald Leader and Kentucky.com, Mark Story. Hello, Mark.
Hey, John.
Happy March Madness, Mark.
I love March Madness. This is the most wonderful time of the year.
And March Magic, that's what Mark Pope says we should call it. I think he got that from his wife, Leanne. She's trying to make him turn it into March Magic. Yes, the field of 68 teams was released on Sunday, Selection Sunday. We're going to talk about that. We're going to answer your questions. I want to thank everybody who registered online for this live chat and who submitted questions. Mark, first, before we get into the draw and so forth, let's talk a little bit about Kentucky's season overall up to this point, the regular season and the SEC tournament. Obviously, Mark Pope's first season as Kentucky's coach. How would you, not necessarily rate the season, but how do you feel about the season up to this point?
It's been a frustrating season just in that they've had so many high-level moments and just won so many big games that it's been frustrating that they've had so many injuries at one position. And that's what's made it tough, not just injuries all at the same position, that I don't know that we got to see really what this team was fully capable of. I do think a lot of the goals that I think needed to be achieved were achieved. I think he needed to install an exciting style of play. I think he did. He needed to, win more than his share of rivalry games. He did. I think the recruiting, when they didn't get Caleb Wilson, maybe some of the recruiting questions came back, but I think the recruiting has been good. And I think that was a question he needed to answer. And then kind of the test that's still out there, I think it would really be great if they could get out of the first weekend because of the NCAA tournament, because Kentucky hasn't done that since 2019.
Right. Yeah, we'll get into the draw here in a second. I think the one thing that he has done, or kind of a combination of things that he has done, really off the court, also on the court, but off the court, I think he's kind of set the tone for how he wants the program to be under his leadership. He's been very enthusiastic. He obviously has been a hit with the fans. Of course, a former player, former captain on the 96 national championship team. As you mentioned, there are still questions about recruiting and that sort of thing. But as far as putting together the roster and the style of play that he wants to use, I think he's made great strides in that area. Would you agree with that? Or is there anything you would quibble with what he's done as far as just setting the whole stage for the program under Mark Pope as coach?
No, not really. I think you made a good point there about the roster construction. I think when this team was healthy, I think the pieces fit and the sum was made, or the sum was greater than the parts. And I think that's really encouraging. One of the things that fascinates me in the current moment of the Kentucky basketball experience, people want more multi-year players. They don't want to be caught on the one and done merry-go-round as much. People want a quote unquote modern offensive style. Well, if you're going to play a modern offensive style, which involves a lot of perimeter shooting, you maybe are not going to be able to be elite defensively, because the players that can really shoot and are also really elite defensively, they're going to be on the fast track to the NBA. So if you want to have some multi-year players and you want a team that is running the quote unquote modern offense, I think I think that's going to show up in how you recruit. And I'm not sure the fans have fully adjusted to that.
Yeah, right. Okay, as you mentioned, goal, at least a short-term goal for the tournament, is to get out of that first weekend. When, as you said, it's not happened since 2019. I think Kentucky fans still have a little, PTSD or PSTD, whatever you call it, from the losses to St. Peter's 2 years ago and Oakland last year. In between, they lost to Kansas State in the second round down at Greensboro. What did you think of Kentucky's draw?
I think it's a decent draw. The more I've learned about Troy, the more interesting that team has become to me. I want to go back a minute. My lasting memory of the St. Peter's game is I was sitting next to you, and you said at one point in overtime, Kentucky's not going to win this game. And you're right.
Yeah, I think I may have said it more out of exasperation than anything else. Yeah, it was kind of a realization because I kept thinking in that game, yeah, they're going to come back. They're behind or it's, close. They're going to pull it out at the end. But then when they kept turning the ball over there at the end and in overtime, I thought they're really, and Sam Peters hit some big shots. They're really going to lose this game. So, yeah. I should have mentioned that Kentucky plays Troy in the first game Friday night, 7:10 p.m. on CBS in Milwaukee. Then they would play. Kentucky is the number 3 seed. They will play, if they win, if they get past Troy, the champions of the Sun Belt Conference tournament. I think Troy ended up like in a 4-way tie for the Sun Belt regular season title, right, Mark? Is that right?
They did with a couple of coaches with Kentucky ties. South Alabama, coached by Laurel County native Richie Riley, and then James Madison, coached by former Memorial head man Preston Spradlin. Yeah, they were in a 4-way tie for first in the Sun Belt, and then they just rampaged through the tournament. Won the Sun Belt, won 3 games in the tournament by double digits every game. They did what every coach wants to do, which is they peaked at the end.
Right. Yeah, I went back and watched the championship game against Arkansas State, which was a fairly close game, and then they turned it on in the second half. I know they've got a really good guard, right? Their leading scorer. I know you can find on Kentucky.com right now the matchups, how Kentucky and Troy match up. Talk a little bit about Troy's best player, somebody Kentucky fans should look for.
Tatum Connerway is a 6'3", 186. He's a senior. He's the Sun Belt Conference Player of the Year. He just lit it up in the Sun Belt Conference tournament. Now, it was interesting sort of digging through his year. Troy has played 3 power conference teams. They played Arkansas, Oregon, and Houston on the road. And Connerway did not shoot well in those games. He's a combined 7 of 33 against power conference teams. And it's interesting, as a team, Troy made 8 of 62 3-pointers in those 3 games. Now, probably what that means is they'll bank in at least four Friday night.
Of course.
But yeah, Connerway's really good. He's like 3rd in the country in steals. He's averages 4.6 rebounds and has 158 assists. I mean, he's a really well-rounded player.
A little trivia here. He was signed by Billy Gillispie, former Kentucky coach Billy Gillispie, to play at Tarleton State. But he didn't end up at Tarleton State. He went to Ranger Junior College instead, where Billy Gillispie had coached before. But when he got out of Ranger Junior College, I would assume the assumption was that he would go with Gillispie to Tarleton. But instead, he ended up at Troy. And I think he was 6th man of the year last year and then Sun Belt Conference Player of the season this year. So there's a little Billy G connection there, kind of tangential, but it's there. So, okay, let's move on to if they win. Let's say Kentucky wins, then they would play the winner of the number 6 seed, Illinois, and Illinois plays the winner of one of the first 4 games, which will be played tomorrow night between Texas and Xavier, both number 11 seeds. What's your early read on those 3 teams? Who do you think is going to end up coming out of that? If Kentucky makes it to the second round, who would Kentucky's opponent be, you think?
I think there's a decent chance it would be Texas. Mm-hmm. I think I'm pretty confident they'll beat Xavier. I don't know what to think of Illinois. I've watched Illinois at times this year and thought that team could go to the Final Four. And I've also watched Illinois just get whacked by, just look horrible. So, that to me is a team you just don't know what you're going to get. I think if Texas wins, since they started the first 4, at least one team has always, advanced into the, I think into the Sweet 16. And I think Texas has a pretty good chance to be that team.
Wow. What do you like about Texas?
I think their guards are good. I think obviously Trey Johnson. I like Tremont Mark, who always plays well against Kentucky. I would give them a pretty good chance I said they advanced into the Sweet 16. I would give them a pretty good chance to advance into the round of 32.
Yeah. I think Mark Pope referred to Trey Johnson as one of the best bad shot shooters he's ever seen. That he made more bad shots on tape than just about film than just about anybody he'd seen. They'd take a shot and you think, well, that's a bad shot, and it goes in. So, yeah, and Texas beat Kentucky during the season down in Austin. Kentucky it was a close game. Kentucky kind of fell apart at the end of that game, turned the ball over a bunch of times, and ended up losing. So that would be interesting with a rematch. Okay, let's play it on out. Let's say it's Kentucky. And let's say if the seeds hold, it would be Kentucky and Tennessee meeting for a third time, this time in the Sweet 16 in Indianapolis. How would you see which means more, that Kentucky's beaten Tennessee twice and beaten them shorthanded, or the old adage that it's hard to beat a good team 3 times in a row, and that Tennessee just won. Just made it to the finals. They lost to Florida in the finals of the SEC tournament, but they beat Auburn to get to the finals. So they're obviously playing pretty well right now. Which do you think means more, the revenge factor for Tennessee or the confidence Kentucky has that they have beaten Tennessee twice?
Well, I think there is reason to think that this is just a matchup that favors Kentucky, just in the way the teams match up. But, I do think Tennessee is playing well, and I think it's interesting. I think Tennessee has been the better overall team, but Kentucky has beaten them twice. I guess when I did my picks, I picked Tennessee to win the game. So I guess by that would mean I think that Tennessee's revenge factor would overcome Kentucky. What may be a Kentucky matchup advantage. I will say there is a question of program DNA at some point here. And, Tennessee, as Kentucky fans love to remind the Vols fans on the social media sites, has never been to a Final Four. And obviously, Kentucky, its recent NCAA tournament problems notwithstanding, has been to a whole lot of Final Fours. And I do wonder if, that might come into play in Kentucky's favor.
Also, you got Rick Barnes, and Rick Barnes has been a really good coach for a long time, but he's had a hard time in the tournament. He's only been to one Final Four. That was with Texas. Last year, they made it to the Elite Eight where they lost to Purdue. Of course, Purdue ended up in the national championship game and lost to Connecticut. I would think every year when Tennessee goes in tournament with Rick Barnes as coach, no matter how good they are, it's going to be the question of, can Rick Barnes finally get it done and get back to the Final Four? Because I think it was 2003 with Texas that he was in the Final Four. You wonder how much of that psychological thing plays into it as well.
I think Tennessee's actually played pretty well in the tournament the last 2 years. They went to the Sweet 16 2 years ago. Remember, without Zakai Ziegler, they went to the Sweet 16 without a point guard.
That's right.
Obviously, last year they got to the Elite Eight and played really well in that game. I mean, that wasn't the case where Tennessee lost the game. I mean, they played well. It was just they were in against another good team, and Purdue won it. So I don't know that the Rick Barnes can't win in March factor is as strong as maybe it once was.
What once was, yeah. Remember didn't they lose to Purdue a few years ago when Tennessee had a really good team and Purdue had a really good team too? I can't remember the guard's name at Purdue who had their star guard who had a big game and beat them in the tournament, but that was a really good Tennessee team as well. They just came up a little short. Okay, well, I guess we should get into go ahead. Were you going to say something there, Mark?
I was just going to say it's interesting that Kentucky and Tennessee, as many times as they've played, have never played in a postseason tournament. So that would be something.
Yes, it
just
would be.
The spectacle of that, the border rivals. That would be cool.
Yeah, and you got and it'd be in Indianapolis, so it'd be not that far away for fans from both teams. Obviously, if Kentucky makes it to Indianapolis, there'll be a lot of Kentucky fans there, no doubt, absolutely. Okay, let's get into some of our questions, and then we might circle back to picks. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, remember in 2014, the Aaron Harrison year, both Kentucky and Tennessee were in Indianapolis for the Sweet 16. The night Kentucky beat Louisville, Michigan beat Tennessee, which prevented an Elite Eight matchup.
Right. Yeah, that's when Conzo Martin was the Tennessee coach.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right.
Okay, let's get into some of the reader questions who've submitted questions beforehand, and then we'll kind of circle back to the bracket about that. We got a question from someone who I think is a little upset that Walker Horn and Zach Tao did not play more in that one game where they got in with 0.2 of a second. And she also asked about the analytics of the coaches about when they decide on that sort of thing. Her question had more to do with when they're up by 30. Why doesn't he put more of the scrubs in? Or the walk-ons in? One of the things that I've noticed is, or I've heard Mark talk about, is that he has a metric for how long a player stays at peak capacity while he's in the game. And when that starts to tail off, they take him out of the game. My question with that is kind of along the same line of questions. I've heard also some fans complain about Mark's substitution patterns, why that sometimes in games they get off to a good start, but through the midway part of the first half, they kind of tail off and the other team comes back on them in the first half. What do you think about his substitution patterns? Have you had any problem with the way he's been using his rotations this year?
Well, to go to the initial question about the walk-ons, I feel bad for them sometimes. Would like to see them get a little more run, but I think the coaches, I think they feel like they have, a finite number of game minutes available, and they're usually going to use those for players that they're trying to develop. Like the freshmen. When this team was healthy, Travis Perry and Trent Noah weren't getting a lot of run. And so when you have kind of mop-up minutes, I think they're probably going to use those on the scholarship players to develop them. To the overall substitution patterns, if you go back and look at Mark Pope at BYU, he basically prefers to play 10 players. And I've heard him say that, they want to play at such a pace that, they feel like, they need to run in fresh troops to be able to stay at that pace. I guess I don't know if it's a criticism, but I guess my observation of the substitutions this year, I think sometimes it seems like they're not mindful of the combinations they're going to have on the floor. I think especially after the injury set in, and you didn't have, you weren't 9 deep with veteran players. I think sometimes they need to be a little more conscious of who they have on the court together.
Yeah. I do think, like you said, and he said that early on, he's going to play. I think our colleague Ben Roberts asked Mark early in the season, as the season goes along, John Calipari wanted to kind of whittle it down to 7 or 8 guys by the time he got to the end of the season and tournament time. Would you do a similar thing? And Mark basically said, no, he didn't think he would. He would play as you said, Mark, about, the style of play and that sort of thing. And then I'm not sure, as you mentioned, with all the injuries, that this year is the definitive case of how we're always going to see Mark substitute. But I feel the same. Back to the initial question, I feel the same way. I feel sorry sometimes and wonder sometimes why the walk-ons don't get more playing time or why they don't get in sooner. But as you mentioned, there's a finite number of minutes. Also, with all the injuries he's had, he's trying to give guys, the freshmen, Colin Chandler, Ansley Almanor, people like that who maybe wouldn't get quite as much playing time. He knows he's going to need them, or he wants them to get more experience, so they're going to play more. I don't really have a big problem with the way Mark is substituted. We had another question about: do you think Kentucky will be in the same bracket as Louisville, Arkansas, or St. John's? I think we already know the answer to that question. No. Did you think he was going to?
I'm going to confident.
You're pretty confident.
I'm going to confidently say no to that.
Okay, yeah, because that was obviously submitted before the brackets came out. Let me ask you this question, though. When BYU came up as the number 6 seed on the show, and everybody kind of thought Kentucky was going to be the 3 seed, did you think, here comes Kentucky, they're going to be that 3 seed, setting up a second-round matchup for Mark Pope against his former team?
I did. I thought, I thought there was a good chance of that. Yeah, I was one of those who thought, this could happen.
Yeah, I was at the watch party there at Rupp Arena at the Champions Club, and the players all laughed when it came up and it wasn't. And Mark came over and talked to him like, what, kind of mocked, like, what are you all laughing about? And all that stuff. I will say that Mark, when we talked to Mark afterwards, somebody asked Pope about that, and he said he would love to play BYU. He loved BYU, and it'd been fun to go up against BYU. Of course, that's easy to say now when you're not going up against BYU, but I thought that was a funny moment as well. Did you think that they would, though, put him in the same bracket with Arkansas, with Calipari? Or the same bracket with Pitino? Or is that kind of worn off with Pitino?
I actually thought there was a better chance. See, I thought Louisville would be a 6 seed. And I thought there was a chance they would do that.
Yeah.
Have Kentucky as a 3 in a pod with Louisville as a 6. I really didn't think they would do Arkansas. Just I don't know why. And plus they were holding that to try to set up, Cal versus Patino if Cal can beat Bill Self.
Yeah. So you think Louisville got the shaft by getting a number 8 seed?
I was surprised. I thought they were going to be a 6. I mean, I know that conference is bad, and you can criticize Louisville for lack of quality wins, but man, they have a whole lot of wins. And I thought, I thought they'd be a 6.
Yeah. I just wonder, did the committee, I know they say they don't do these types of things. I'd say, well, we're going to slot them in Lexington. We know 8's probably, there probably should be a little higher than that, but we're letting them play in Lexington, so we're going to put them in at 8. Of course, I'll put them in if they win. They play the overall number 1 seed in Auburn. So, but I know the committee doesn't do that. Let me ask you another question, and then we'll get back to these questions. North Carolina, they play, as we're recording this, they play tonight against San Diego State. That's been the big question. Every podcast I've listened to or talk show, that's all they talk about. Should North Carolina have been in the tournament? Mark Story, what say you? Should North Carolina, with a 1-12 record against quad 1 teams, did they deserve to be in the tournament?
In the context of sports, this is one of the all-time travesties. This team had no business in the NCAA tournament. I mean, the only positive that came out of this is about the strongest argument possible against tournament expansion. Because if this team can get in, we sure don't need 6 or 7 more.
Right. Will they lose to San Diego State tonight? You can say it now because they haven't played yet.
I kind of think they'll win, actually.
Yeah, I think they'll win too, just to show everybody. Like you said, those first 4 teams, a lot of times they surprise you. We have a couple of questions here. They've already moved on to next year. Who's coming back next year? And one specific question was the chances of Otega Owe returning next year. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think Otega will be back? Will Double O be back in a Kentucky uniform next year? He has another year of eligibility remaining.
This is not based on any inside information. This is just my feeling, but I kind of think he will. I think another year of offensive development, sort of expanding his game, I think would help him as a pro prospect. And I'm going to think he will be in line for a pretty nice, NIL boost, given how good a year he's had. And from what I've heard, and again, this is not based on any inside information, I think he likes playing at Kentucky and playing for Mark Pope. So my guess, and I'm just guessing, is I think he'll be back.
Yeah, if I had to bet money on it, I would bet, not a lot of money, but I would bet that he will be back next year for all the reasons that you mentioned. What about anybody else? I guess, of course, I think the 3 freshmen all 3 will be back. I kind of
that leaves Brandon Garrison,
who has eligibility left.
Brandon Garrison's the only other player who could come back.
Yeah. And I know that Brandon, some fans on social media, Brandon put my last game at Rupp Arena before the last game against LSU. I'm not sure that Brandon meant that literally. I think he just, that it was the end of the season. Who knows? And who knows with the transfer portal and NIL, like you said, it's hard to predict on any of these kids what's going to happen. But my guess is that those guys will be back. This is going to surprise you, Mark, but we got to go ahead. Were you going to add something to that?
I don't have as strong a feeling about Brandon as I do Otega. So I'm not as sure on him. And again, I'm just guessing anyway.
Yeah. I know you're going to be surprised, but we got a couple of referee questions on here. One was about the physical play and why isn't there more attention paid to traveling, palming, double dribbling, and the lack of consistency with block charge calls between crews and even refs in the same crew? And then we had another question asking, does the basketball staff do analytics on the referees that might call UK games? I don't think you can get on any kind of social media, especially X or Twitter, and it's just filled with people complaining about the officiating. How do you think? I want to take up for the officials in the standpoint that it's a really hard game to call if you sit anywhere close down, and it gets harder all the time by the pace of the game and so forth, and all the things they put on the officials. I will say that I, too, think that a lot of times it's inconsistent. I have a major beef with officiating, which I will reveal in a minute, which will not be a big surprise if you've read any of my stuff. Mark, what do you think of the officiating?
I think it's inconsistent. My pet peeves. I have two officiating pet peeves. I wish we would get rid of off the ball charges as a call. I hate guys. Somebody beats their man, is driving, and a weak side defender jumps in the path. I don't really care whether they're set or not. To me, that should not be you shouldn't be able to draw a foul that way. So I wish they would change the rule on that. And replay just drives me batty. And there's just so much of it, and it just takes all the pace and all the drama out of the end of games. And actually, Jacob Tamme, the former Kentucky football player, makes a very, I think, good point about all the stoppages of play. You use replay because you don't want a missed call to distort the outcome of the game. But all these stoppages of play, in terms of giving players time to rest, giving a coach an extra timeout to draw a play, well, that's distorting, potentially distorting the outcome of the game. I wish we could just go to a system where each coach has 2 challenges, and that just becomes part of the strategy. Do you use your challenges early? Do you hold one? That kind of thing. And then outside those those challenges, the refs have to call the game, and we have to live with it. The whole replay rigmarole just drives me crazy.
I cannot nod my head enough times to agree with that. I would be even happy with 1 challenge, but two seems more fair, but I'd be happy with 1 challenge. I think Mark Pope said the same thing. I think he said a red flag or towel they would throw, much like a NFL coach or whatever. Just too many monitor reviews. I think there's too many. The games are getting to be too long. There are too many timeouts. You already got the media timeouts. Now, Mark, you follow the women's game close, a lot closer than I do. The women's games have quarters. I remember Jen Smith, who our colleague at the time. When they went to quarters, I remember asking her, "Do you like it?" And she said, "I thought I wouldn't like it, but I do like the quarters." Jay Billis is among those who says that college basketball should go to quarters. Obviously, you would reset the fouls after each quarter. What about you? Would you like to see it go to quarters?
I do. I had the same experience that Jennifer did. I expected not to like it just because it was such a change. And, college basketball, you think of, 40 minutes, the 20-minute halves. It just seems like sort of the essence of the sport. But no, the quarters are much better for the reason you mentioned. You reset the fouls after each quarter, and that way there's not nearly as much free throw shooting. So the game is quicker. It's just a better game. So yeah, I think the men should go to quarters.
Yeah, no, I agree. I even in one of my columns said maybe at the end of games bring back the old NBA thing of 3 to make 2. If you foul inside the last 2 minutes, the other team, and you're over the bonus and you're in the bonus, you get 3 shots to make 2. I didn't get a lot of support for that. So maybe I'm too old. I'm the only one who kind of remembers that when I was a kid, the NBA used to do that.
I'm not proud of it. I remember 3 to make 2. But here's my question: the women's game, you also advanced the ball on timeouts in the last minute. Would you favor that for the men?
I would be in favor of that. And don't tell Mike DeCourcy I said that, because I know he's adamantly opposed to that. But what about you?
Yeah, I heard him on the Leach Report. Yes, he's very opposed. Yeah, I think I do. I mean, obviously, it somewhat is I guess it's somewhat a manipulation of the competition. But yeah, I think I favor it just because it sets up so many great dramatic finishes. So yeah, I think I would favor that. Yes.
Yeah, I think it also might teams might save their timeouts more towards the end, knowing that they can do that. We'll see. As far as does the UK staff do analytics on the referees that call the games? I am sure they do, but they're probably not going to tell you about that. They keep that information for themselves. And not so much that I'm sure they all do, not so much for, who's going to be against us or for us, but how tightly a game is called. Here's a crew that likes to call it really tight, or here's a crew that maybe lets us play a little more physical, that sort of thing. I'm sure. I mean, I don't think Mark and this staff especially leaves too many stones unturned. So I would imagine that they do analytics on the referees.
Yeah, I don't know that for sure, but I would be stunned given how analytically oriented they are that they're not doing something to track the officiating.
Okay, let's circle back to the team for a minute because we have a question that was submitted here by someone watching on the live stream. Ivan wants to know about Kerr Kriisa. Um, uh, and I assume about his availability. Mark has said that his window of availability is over, and that he can't come back and won't come back in the tournament. But I think he is a guy who can, if I'm not mistaken, can apply for a red shirt and come back next year for a medical red shirt. Would you think that he would do that?
I'm not sure. Yeah, we should have discussed him when we were talking earlier about the players who could come back. I'm not sure. I don't know what Kentucky has promised guards they're recruiting. I don't know, what Kerr wants to do. So yeah, this is a strong opinion here. I'm not sure what he would do.
That's good. That's a good, honest answer. Yeah, I don't know either. If I had to guess, I might guess that he would come back. That he would like to have the full experience of the full Kentucky experience of playing. But we'll see. Okay, as far as the field goes, Mark, here's a person who submitted a question previously about whom do you consider to be the biggest dark horse team, a team seeded between 7 and 16 who might make it to the Elite Eight? Do you have a team that's 7 or higher or something like that might make it to the Elite Eight?
That's a good question.
I can tell you one that I like, and that's McNeese State. I really like Will Wade, their coach. I know a lot of people don't like him. I know Will Wade was paying players before you were supposed to pay players. Now he can pay whoever he wants. So, and I guess everybody thinks he's going to North Carolina State. I think he's a really good coach. Now, that I liked them last year, and they got blasted in the first round. So the same thing could happen to them this year. They play Clemson in their first. They are a number 12 seed. They play Clemson in their first game. I think they can beat Clemson. And then they would play the winner of Purdue and High Point. I know a lot of people are picking High Point to beat Purdue. I really like, I like Purdue's coach, Matt Painter, a lot, but I just don't think this is a very, really good Purdue team. Certainly not as good as the teams they've had in the past. So in my bracket, I've actually got McNeese beating Purdue and advancing to the not to the Elite Eight. I have them losing to Houston, but I've got them in the Sweet 16. So if I had to pick a dark horse, they would be my dark horse.
I don't know if these teams can get to the Elite Eight, but I can give you some high seeds that I like. I really like UC San Diego, and I'm a bit of a night owl, so I stayed up late and watched them, and I think they're really good. They've got a tough first game. They're a 12 against number 5 seed Michigan, which was a team I thought about picking to go to the Final Four, but instead I picked them to get beat in the first round because I really like UC San Diego. I like New Mexico. I think Richard Pitino has a really good team, and I think they have a good chance to beat Marquette in a 10-7 game. And the other team I really like is Akron. They've got veteran guards. They won kind of a miracle comeback to win the MAC tournament, and they're playing Arizona, a team that I don't have a lot of confidence or a lot of belief in. I think Akron has a good chance to win that game.
Our former colleague, Mark Maloney, himself a former Akron Zip, he thanks you for that shout out to the Akron Zips. Okay, a couple more questions before we get. I want to save one question for last. One person wanted to know, it said UK pay is reported online on Kentucky.com on the salary database for UK employees. Is name, likeness, and image publicly available online or by request? I don't know if that's one thing that we've sort of complained about, and I think other people complain about. There hasn't been much transparency as far as NIL goes. I don't know of any place that you can find online what players are making. Do you, Mark?
I do not. No, I do think in the structure that is supposedly, or the NCAA hopes to build out of the House settlement, that there will be a registry of deals that players are supposed to report. Now, I don't know if I'm a player, can they make me report my deal? I'm not sure, but I do wonder if that registry exists, if that will be subject to open records.
Yeah. Right. No, yeah, true, true. Yeah, the revenue sharing that's going to come out of that House settlement when it's finally approved and put into place. Obviously, I think that they're talking about a pool of anywhere between 20 and 21 million, 21, 22 million, something like that. It would be divided among the sports. Football would probably get the large part of that just because there's so many football players. Football makes more money than basketball, obviously bigger stadiums, bigger TV rights, and so forth. But I would think Kentucky would have a pretty sizable the Kentucky basketball players would have a sizable cut of that as well. But no, I don't know of anything where you can find, what you hear all kinds of stories about what players are making and so forth, but I don't know of anything that you can find that's definitive about what players are getting in as far as NIL is concerned.
I am told when I talk to coaches that anything you hear in terms of what some, player X is making in NIL is almost always a wildly inflated figure.
Right. Yeah. No. True. Okay. I want to save. I want to save one question for. Well, there's two questions I want to save here, but I'll go with this one first, and then we'll get to the how far Kentucky will go in this tournament. And our Final Four picks. Someone asked, "What is your favorite memory of a previous NCAA game played in Rupp Arena?" Because not just Kentucky is in the tournament, and well, I got another question too. But not just Kentucky's in the tournament. But the first and second round games are being played in Lexington. As we mentioned earlier, Louisville is playing Creighton in a first round game in Lexington at Rupp Arena. And Mark, do you have a favorite memory of a previous NCAA game at Rupp Arena?
I do. I have two, one of which I was not at, but I was in Lexington. I think the greatest game ever played in Rupp Arena was the 1985 NCAA championship game when Villanova stunned Georgetown with the quote unquote perfect game. They hit 90% of their shots in the second half. And that was just a tremendous game. And I was in college at UK at that time, and just the whole weekend in Lexington, just the buzz around town. That was just great, just a great event. And my other one was in 2002 NCAA tournament game I covered. Indiana upset Duke, Mike Davis en route to taking the Hoosiers to the Final Four, the last time they've ever been. And that was an amazing thing too, just to see all that red in Rupp Arena and just the crowd, a Rupp Arena crowd just super behind Indiana because it was Duke, and that was a pretty memorable night. So those would be my two.
Yeah, I'd have to vote for the 85. I wasn't at that Indiana Duke game. I'd have to vote for the 85 championship game. I remember our former colleague Jerry Tipton's lead on his story was Snowball 1, Hell 0, because everybody said that they had a snowball's chance in hell of that Villanova team of beating Georgetown. And if you remember, there were three Big East teams in the Final Four that year: Villanova, Georgetown, and St. John's, and then Memphis State, as they were called at that time, were was the fourth team, and obviously that was big. And also going on that weekend was Kentucky was hiring a new basketball coach because Joe B. Hall had retired. So you had all that buzz going on as well. Who was the new coach going to be? And it ended up being Eddie Sutton. A lot of people thought it was going to be Lute Olson. A lot of people thought it was going to be Gene Bartow. Lute Olson was the coach. He was he at Arizona at the time or Iowa? I think he was at Iowa at the time, wasn't he? I can't remember for sure.
I'm not sure.
And then Bartow was a UAB. He had been at UCLA, then he went to UAB. There was talk about Bartow been in Memphis State before that, being the head coach.
And there was also a boomlet that weekend for Terry Holland.
That's right.
Virginia team. Yeah,
that's right. You had Ralph Sampson, who Kentucky thought they were going to get right up until the moment Ralph Sampson committed to Virginia. So, that was a wild weekend for a lot of different reasons. That would be probably my favorite. We neglected to talk about the women, so let's talk about the UK women because obviously they've had a great season. They are also playing in Lexington this weekend in Memorial Coliseum, historic Memorial Coliseum, this weekend in the tournament. What did you think of their draw? Mark, you follow them, like I said earlier, a lot closer than I do. What did you think of their draw, and what do you think of their chances in the tournament?
I was a little surprised. I thought they would get a 3. I guess that the Oklahoma wound up getting the 3, so I guess that SEC tournament quarterfinal basically was for the 3 seed. I think this is a fairly tough little pod here. They opened with Liberty. That's a team that will be very familiar to Kenny Brooks with all the years he spent coaching in the state of Virginia. I know he's very familiar with Kerry Green, the Liberty coach. Liberty's not an easy team to play. They're holding people under 60 points a game. But, I think Kenny Brooks will, know how to play against this team. So I expect UK to get through that one. On the other side, you've got, Fairfield, whose coach, Carly Dudonis, I think was in the mix, for the Kentucky job last year when it was open. I think she's widely seen as a rising star. They're the 12 seed. They will play Kansas State. And I think Kansas State is good. I think that's a difficult team. And their best player is Akoya Lee, who's a 6'6" center, and she's been hurt. But what I'm reading is she's feeling good and is expected to play this weekend in Lexington. So if the seeds hold and it's Kentucky and Kansas State, that is going to be a tremendous round of 32 game, because that's going to be two high-level teams.
And when is Kentucky's first game in the women's tournament?
They play Friday at noon.
Friday at noon. Okay, so you can watch the women Friday at noon, and you can watch the men 7:10 on CBS on Friday night. Okay, the big question, and we've got it both in our questions that were submitted beforehand and in those watching tonight. How far is Kentucky going to win how far is Kentucky going to go in this tournament? And then I'll also throw in there who's going to win this tournament. Now, I know Mark has already written who he thinks is going to win the tournament, but Mark, I will say this, Mark did this right after the draw, so he didn't really have he had to get it posted as quickly as he could. He didn't have a whole lot of time to think, so I'm going to ask him if he's having any second thoughts about his picks. But first of all, Mark, how far does Kentucky go in this tournament?
I have them picked to the Sweet 16. And I had them losing to Tennessee. Again, I could talk myself into, I could easily talk myself into picking Kentucky in that game. I just thought at the time that Tennessee would have the revenge factor, and I think Tennessee has played better down the stretch than Kentucky has, although I might not have felt that way after the UK-Missouri game. In terms of my national champion, I decided, probably about February 1st, I thought the most complete team in the country was Florida. I haven't seen anything since then to change my mind. So I picked the Gators to win it all. The one thing that worries me is I was writing that, I was watching the ESPN bracket show, and every freaking expert picked Florida to win the tournament, which makes me think they're probably not going to win the tournament.
Are you saying misery loves company? You all will do the same way. You get a little nervous when everybody else picks the same team?
I did. I thought when I decided Florida was going to win it all, which, like I said, was early in February, I thought I was sort of making a little bit of an out of the box pick. But by the time it got around, everybody's in that box.
Yeah, I too think that Kentucky will make it to the Sweet 16, but would also lose to Tennessee. Kind of circling back a little bit, but is there any one thing where Kentucky's got to do in the tournament to have a chance to beat a team like Tennessee and get even farther to get to the Elite Eight? Is there something that they've been lagging in or not very good in? Hey, they got to turn this around.
Well, if you just look at most of Kentucky's games, the key indicator has been who makes the most 3-point shots.
Yeah.
So I think Kentucky is going to have to shoot well.
Yeah, and I wrote about this. I think it's going to be online tomorrow. One of the things I mentioned was they got to stop turning the ball over. They were really good at the beginning of the season and midway of the season. They were among the leaders in turnover percentage in all of college basketball. That's really tailed off of late. They had 16 turnovers against Alabama the other night that led to 29 points by Alabama. They got it. Lamar Butler did not play in that game, so obviously that didn't help him. He's their starting point guard, but they got to do better. They got to protect the basketball better. We talked about the Texas game earlier. That's one of the reasons they got beat by Texas down the stretch. They made a couple of crucial turnovers in that game. My final four, I kind of went with chalk like you did as far as picking number one seeds. I think Auburn will hit the reset button. I've got Auburn. back in the is the overall number 1 seed. I have them in the Final Four. I have Duke in the Final Four. I have Houston. I thought in reading up on Troy, I saw an interview with Scott Cross, the Troy coach, who said they played Houston earlier in the season, and Houston played, as he put it, life-changing defense. Watching Houston play defense was life-changing, he said. So I think they're really good. I, too, like Florida, but I think they're going to lose to St. John's. I think this is the year of Rick Pitino. It's the year of Ricky P. He's made a comeback. He's on Vice Sports. He's on the the Tonight Show. He's back. He's everybody that halftime speech he gave his team. People are repeating it to each other. I'm sure bosses are making the same speech without the F-bombs to their employees. I think it's the year of Rick Pitino. I think that they will beat Florida. Not only will they beat Florida in the regional title, I've got St. John's winning the whole thing. They're the number 1 defensive team in the country. They're not that great on offense, but I think Ricky can figure out a way. And I think I joke that Rick Pitino will be holding the ladder so Mike Rapoli can climb the ladder and cut down the nets, because he's their top NIL guy, the horse racing guy who loves horse racing and wants to win the Kentucky Derby. I think he's going to win a national championship with Rick Pitino before he wins the Kentucky Derby. So I'm picking St. John's.
That would be a great story.
Well, that's what we root for. We root for great stories. And then Rick Pitino can come back again to Rupp Arena as a 3-time national championship. I'm going to count as Louisville champion. But it should be a championship. I don't care if they did take that banner down. But it should be a great tournament. I think it's been a great season. It's been a really fun season covering Kentucky and covering Mark Pope in his first year. Everything's just been kind of new and different, and I think that's a lot. Fans are excited. Sure, they were hoping for him to have maybe a few more wins in the SEC, but I think it's going to be a great tournament. Anything in particular you're looking forward to in this tournament, Mark?
I'm just really excited about the UC San Diego Tritons.
I'm going to be watching them with new interest because of that. We want to thank everybody who registered, and then everybody who submitted questions, and we want to thank everybody who tuned into this live stream or this tournament chat, this AMA chat. We really appreciate it. And everybody have a great tournament, and be sure and check out all of our coverage on Kentucky.com and in the print edition of the Lexington Herald Leader. Thanks again, Mark.
Thanks, John.